Music theory with OneNote. Scales built by interval or modal distance. Comparing the major modes, those being the Ionian mode, otherwise known as the major scale, the Lydian mode, and the Mixolydian mode. So get ready and some coffee, because although we're only playing with one note, it's a beautiful note. You're not required to, but if you have access to it and would like to follow along, we're currently in the OneNote file of Modal Node System, MNS Presentation 1314, OneNote, scales built by interval or modal distance, comparing the major modes. We have our list of presentations, which we plan on adding plenty more to shortly. Also noting that within this OneNote presentation, we're going to spend all of our time on music theory side of things, but in a similarly numbered and named presentation, we actually build these tables in Excel, practicing our Excel music and table visualization skills all at the same time. We're going to be continuing our discussion of intervals, but this time comparing and contrasting the collection of intervals for each of the scales or each of the modes, or in the way that I think it's the best way to visualize it, each of the distances that don't land you in the ocean from each of the continent points or collection of 7 notes within our collection of notes. So the reason I think that is the best way to visualize it will become more clear once we once again think about the best way to visualize the fretboard, that being as like a map of the territory, similar to the globe. We have 7 destination continent locations. We have 5 non-destination ocean type locations that we want to go through to get to the continent locations. Our head is up in space above the top low heavy E string, the one closest to the ceiling, and we notice the fretboard can be visualized as though it's rotating around like the globe rotating around, assigning it 12 degrees of rotation, typically working in the 4th degree of rotation, meaning the collection of notes that are around the C major scale. We could go to C sharp, we could go to D, we could go to D sharp, but that would just mean the whole thing would shift, just like the world spinning around. Once we pick the collection of notes, I no longer want to visualize the world by the notes, but rather by the continent equivalents, that being the Nashville number system, if you're familiar with that, which is basically a permanent nodal number system, a mode number system. The 1 being the Ionian, the 4 being the Lydian, the 3 being the Phrygian, the 5 being the Mixolydian, and so on and so forth. So what we want to do now is measure the distances, which we saw before, but last time we kind of listed all of the distances that you can have from any particular point. This time, we want to think about all the points within a collection of 7 notes and compare and contrast the different distances from each of those points, which land us on another continent, which do not land us on the ocean. So the basic setup will be, let's start with the Ionian, because that's going to be what normally happens, the major scale, the Ionian. If I want to go one continent up, so that would be from Ionian to Dorian, the question is, how many continents and oceans, or how many notes would that be? It would be 2 notes up. So remember, we have 2 different measuring tools here. One being how many continents up is it, which would be modal half steps or scale degrees. If I make that the 1, this would be the 2nd scale degree or the 1st modal half step, or 1 continent up. And then notes, which would be continents and oceans. That would be 2 continents and oceans up. So in order to get 1 continent up or 1 modal half step up, it takes us 2 steps, continents and oceans. Is that the same if I start on, say, the Lydian? If I want to go 1 continent up, how far do I have to go in terms of continent and oceans, or in terms of notes? We also have to go 2. But what if I started from the Locrian node and I wanted to go 1 continent up from there? Well, then I would only take 1 step because there's no ocean in between it. If I go 2 notes up, then I'm going to land in the ocean. That is, in essence, what we're doing when we're trying to say what are the interval distances as we compare them. That's going to matter from a musical standpoint because, of course, when we play these different progressions in a chord or one at a time, they give us a different feeling. So then we can associate the distance with the feeling, which is not what most people do. They associate the feeling with these little letters that are meaningless, like a major or a minor or a perfect. those are the things that for me also still trigger how I'm thinking about the interval. So I'm not saying I have a perfect visualization of this, but I know conceptually that those letters aren't adding anything new if I knew the distance in notes. So what I'm trying to train my mind to do, and what I would recommend you do from the start, is to train your mind to say those letters are basically meaningless if I could drop them entirely if I add the note distance. So in other words, instead of calling this just a major second, we want to call it a 2 note away second. I can drop the measure if I have the 2 notes away, because the 2 notes away should be the thing that tells me that it is in the major scale, because I'm going to memorize that instead of telling me that the M tells me it's in the major scale. A large M doesn't give me any new information. I could just as easily remember that a distance of 2 notes is going to be in the major scale if I measure that from the Ionian, right? So that's going to be the general idea. So we'll go forward first, and then we'll do the same kind of thing going backwards in future presentations. And as we do this, we will notice that the distances from the major nodes, the Ionian, the Lydian, and the Mixolydian, have similarities, meaning if I go the same distances, I tend to land on continents with the major modes, whereas there's a lot more differences in the minor modes. In other words, if I went the same distances from the Aeolian as I did from the Ionian, I'm more likely to land in the ocean. So from a practical standpoint, we start to group the major and minor modes together, and we basically define the major and minor modes by the third. That'd be the third scale degree, or 1-2, the second modal half step. In other words, the majors have a 1-2-3-4 note away second modal half step, or third scale degree. And why do we measure it that way? Kind of like the third is kind of like the flavor of the scale. And so it might be partially happenstance and partially the fact that that is a very distinct interval that gives you a happy versus sad feeling, whereas the minors have a minor third, which would be 1-2-3 note away minor third, or 3 note away second modal half step. So that's going to be the idea. Once we get the major intervals, I want to compare the other 2 modes to it that are major, which are the Lydian and the Mixolydian. Why? Because they're going to be most similar and only have 1 interval difference. So from a conventional, just how am I going to stack this stuff in my mind in the most efficient way, that's the easiest way to do it. Memorize the major, then memorize the other major modes that will have 1 interval difference, and then we memorize the minor, which is kind of like the most opposite, not exactly, but the most different from the major is what you would think, at least. And then we'll measure the other 2 modes compared to it that are minor modes, the Dorian and the Phrygian, and they are only going to have 1 interval difference than the minor mode. And then the Locrian is the crazy one that's more similar to the minor, but it has 2 intervals that are different. One's easy to remember because it's just the flat 5, and the other one's fairly easy. We'll get into that later, though. So we're working on the majors right now. So that's where we start out. Now remember, the intervals from the conventional perspective were built all off of the major, which is the Ionian mode. So that's what all of our naming convention is, but that's just a convention. And so it almost throws us off. It causes us as much problems as it does benefit, in my opinion. So we're gonna have the 12 notes in our musical alphabet. We select the ones related to the C major by applying our formula and all the related modes. That would be whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. Here's going to be the 7 notes. We're going to give them the Nashville number system, 1 through 7, and an abbreviated mode that we will be working with. Now, I'm also going to give us a list of all of the normal scaled or intervals that we talked about in prior presentations. So in other words, if I list going clockwise, which is what we're going to do now, we're going to go counterclockwise in a future presentation. But if we go clockwise from any note, and there's 12 notes, and I'm not thinking about octave, I'm thinking about a racetrack, we're just going around the racetrack, we're thinking clockwise here, then you can go the same spot or 11 distance up from that spot. And then we gave them a naming convention based on those, and these are based on the major scale. Remember how these naming conventions basically work. They usually drop the number of notes, which is not the thing you typically want to do. I would add the notes and then drop the letter would be better thing to do, because then you'll remember it properly. But they basically said if it's in the major key, which is the Ionian mode, then we're going to give it a major. So major, major, or we're going to give it a perfect. Why did they give it a perfect? Because they just thought, I believe the fifth here, the 7-note away perfect fifth was really special. So they wanted to make it a perfect. And that meant that they had to make the inverse a perfect as well, which is this is a 7-note away perfect fifth and a 5-note away perfect fourth. And then once they made those perfect, they had to deal with the consequences of that. But all the other ones that are intervals in the major scale, they made major. And then all of the ones that don't fit, they basically made minor. So that if you gave a numbering system, what does that look like? It looks like this should be the 0.5s, right? It's the one in the middle between the other two. So that's, one way that you can kind of see it. So those are going to be the intervals. Now, so that means that these are all the intervals. Now we just want to look at the intervals that fit into a particular scale and be comparing and contrasting them. And you can see that this is designed just to give you the naming convention on the major scale, but doesn't help you too much with any of the other scales, because the minors, for example, don't always fit in even the main minor, the Aeolian. So really, this is just a convention based on the major scale. It's not really that helpful for learning. I would actually, again, drop the letters in your mind as the principal thing that drives your thinking. All right, so we're going to be scaling. We have scale degrees that we're going to be comparing, and then we have the modal distance. Now remember, the idea here is that we're looking at each point. We're going to start with the Ionian node, and we're just going to say, what if I go one continent up, or one modal half step up, or what if I go 2 up? Now, I'd like to look at it this way, meaning I start on Ionian to Ionian. I don't go any continents up, and then I go 1 continent up, and then I go 2 continents up, 3 continents up, not counting the oceans, and then ask the question, what's the distance if I have continents and oceans, right? That's kind of the question. But remember, the naming convention is basically wrong. They started with a scale degree concept. So now that we have to say the 1 represents not 1 continent up, but that's the continent that we are on. So this is the actual proper naming convention. The scale degrees are all off by 1. So if I say it's the first, that means I didn't move anywhere. It doesn't mean I moved up 1 continent. It means I didn't go anywhere. If I say it's the second, that means I moved up 1 continent. If I say it's the third, that means I moved up 2 continents from the point that I'm on, right? Not including the oceans. So that would mean from the Ionian, this scale degrees 1, which would be a modal distance of 0, would be a range of an I to an I, or Ionian to Ionian. We didn't go anywhere. So if I was down here, it would be I to I. We didn't go anywhere. Now, we could have gone I to I here, but I'm not thinking about octaves right now. So I would still think of that as just going around in the same lap. So I'm at the same point, basically, going around in a circle, not thinking about going up in octave. If I go in the second scale degree, then that means I went up 1 continent. So from the Ionian, I would have gone to like the Dorian. So that would be an ID modal range, which would be a 1-2 modal range, right? A 1-2 modal range. If I go a third scale degree, that would mean I went up 2 continents. So that would be what I would call a 1-3 modal range. So 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, right? And it would be 1, 2, 3 would be the third scale degree, or 2 modal half steps up. All right, a 4 scale degree would be 3 continents up. So that would be an IY, or an Ionian to the Lydian. So that would be 4 up, 1, 2, 3, 4. Wait a sec. Ionian to the Lydian, 3 up, 1, 2, 3 right here, IY. And then I can go a 5th scale degree means we went up 4 continents, which would be an IX, or an Ionian to the Mixolydian. So that would be a 1-5 modal range from a natural number system. So now we're going up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 to the Mixolydian. And then we've got this one, which is going to be a sixth scale degree, which would be the 5 continents up from the Ionian, would land us on the Aeolian. So that would be a 1/6 modal range. So if I started here, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to get to the 6th scale degree. So that would be there. And then if we go 7 up, we run out of space from the Ionian, but we're going to say that would be an IN. So we'd go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. If we look at here, because that would be the next. So here, this repeats here, and then that would be 6 up going this way. All right. So now the question is, all right, what's the distance if I look at continents and oceans? So if I take one scale degree, which would be staying on the same point, obviously I didn't move anywhere from the standpoint of modal half steps, and the scale degree would be 1. And then the notes would be, I didn't move anywhere, I stayed on one point. Note half steps would be the same, and that would be a 0 note away perfect first. Why? Because we just named the convention over here. 0 note away is a perfect first. Remembering that the 1 represents the scale degree, and the 0 I am adding. Most people don't say it, but you have to know it because that's the important thing, right? It's 0 notes away is really the important thing. The P is not important. If you add the 0, you can drop the P. Okay, and then so the modal distance I would like to say is it's a 0 note away from the Ionian node, 0th modal half step, which would be the first scale degree. All right, what if I go up the second scale degree? What does that mean? That means I went a distance of 1 continent up. So that means if that would be an ID modal range or a 1-2 modal range, I'm going 1 continent up. And so we'd say that would be 1 modal half step up. That's what it means to go 1 continent up, which means it would be the second scale degree. So if I look at this one, from here to here, there it is, for example. And so the note half steps would be 2. So it takes 2, which would be continents and oceans. What do we call that? We call that a 2 note away major second. Why is it a major second? Because the major represents that it's in the major scale, but that major second is also in the Aeolian. So it doesn't really tell you anything except about the major scale for the most part, unless you use a bunch of tricks and conventions to shoehorn it into giving more meaning than it really was designed to have in the first place. I'd rather call it a 2 note away from the Ionian first modal half step, right? Because it's 2 notes away, continents and oceans, and it's the first modal half step. But they made this the first, which means it's the second scale degree, right? So then if I go 3 up, the scale degree 3, the modal distance would be 2. So now I'm just going to say this is going to go from here to here, and that would be an IP. So now we're going from Ionian to the Phrygian, which would be a 1-3. So the modal half steps or continents up would be 2, 1, 2, and the scale degree would be 3, 1, 2, 3, and the note half steps would be 4, ocean 1, continent 2, ocean 3, and 4. So then what do we call that? We call that, I would call it a 4 note away major third. Most people just say major third, but if you add the 4, you can drop the M, because it's the distance of 4 that should tell you that distance will land you on a continent if you start from the Ionian mode. And I would rather even start to memorize, most people don't even think about it this way, but I think it would be useful to say that's an IP modal range, right? If you think about it this way, you're going to say it's a 4 note away from the Ionian node, second modal half step. So then that should tell you where you're going on the map. If I'm going 4 notes away from a major scale or the Ionian mode, where's that going to land you? It's going to land you on the P. So I should be able to name it either way, right? I should be able to say the modal range is an IP modal range. What's the distance? Well, it's a 4 note away from the Ionian node, second modal half step. If someone tells you that you're going 4 notes away from the Ionian node, second modal half step, then you should be able to say, well, where am I going to land? I'm going to land on the Phrygian continent. I'm going to land on the third, right? Either I want to be able to see it kind of either way. Again, naming it by not note, but but the mode, because that will be the same for all 12 collections of notes, right? So what if I go 4 scale degrees? That would be 3 up. So if I go 4, it would be up here. Then that would land us on the Lydian. That would be a 1-4 modal range. So we would say that would be modal half steps of 3. So 1, 2, 3. It would be a scale degree of 4. Meaning if I make that the 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it would be notes up of 5, meaning ocean, continent, continent. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what do we call a distance of 5? A perfect fourth. I'd rather call it a 5 note away fourth, or a 5 note away perfect fourth, right? But it would rather be called a 5 note away from the Ionian node third modal half step, 1, 2, 3, which would give us the 4th scale degree if I make that the 1, which is stupid to do, but we're stuck with it. All right, what if we have a 5th? And so I'm trying to find the 5th, which means I'm going 4 continents up. So if I go 4 continents up, I'd be out here. So I can see that's going to be, if I go 4 continents up from the Ionian, it would be 1 plus 4, or of course the 5th, which would be Mixolydian, an IX modal range, a 1-5 modal range. So that means it's going to be 4 continents up, or 4 modal half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's going to be scale degrees. If I make this to 1, then 5, because the scale degrees are all off by 1. And the note half steps would then be the continents and oceans, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 up. What do we call a 7 note distance? A perfect 5th. I'd rather call it a 7 note away 5th, but you could put the P in there, 7 note away P5, 7 note away perfect 5th. It would better be named a 7 note away from the Ionian node, 4th modal half step, 1, 2, 3, 4, which would be the 5th scale degree. What if I go 6 up? Let's go to this one down here. If I go 6 up from like this one, then that would be here. So now I'm going 5 up, or 6th scale degree, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that would be it's going to land me on the Aeolian. That would be a 1-6 modal range. So then it would be 5 modal half steps, or 5 continents up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which means it would be the 6th scale degree if I make that the 1, which means it has continents and oceans of 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right, and what do we call a 9 note away distance? A major 6. But I'd rather call it a 9 note away 6th, or 9 note away major 6, or better yet, a 9 note away from the Ionian node 5th modal half step, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which would be the 6th scale degree. What if I go 7 scale degree, and it would be the 6th modal half steps? So this repeats here, and so then I can go to this one. It's going to go to the Locrian. So now that would be an IN modal range, a 1-7 modal range, which would be 6 modal half steps, or continents up. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This repeats 5, 6. That would be, if I make the first one the 1, it would be the 7th scale degree. And then it's going to be, why is this being lame? 11 distance, meaning 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 repeats here. 10, 11. A distance of 11. What's that called? A major 7. I'd rather call it an 11 note away 7th, but you could put the major in there, 11 note away major 7. Better yet, an 11 note away from the Ionian node, 6th modal half step, right? All right, let's go to the next one, and let's say we're now measuring from the Lydian mode. So I've now made the Ionian mode green, and the Lydian mode is going to be blue. And we're going to be asking the question, hey, if I go 1 continent up from the Lydian, is the distance in oceans and continents the same as going 1 continent up from the Ionian? What if I go 2 continents up from the Lydian? Is the distance the same in continents and oceans as if I go 2 continents up from the Ionian? So we're going to start off by not going anywhere. We're going to imagine the modal half steps are 0 modal half steps. That's going to be a distance of a Lydian to Lydian. We stay in the same spot. That would be a 4-4 modal range, 0 modal half steps, which would be the 1st scale degree. And that means that the note half steps would be 0. We didn't go anywhere from the Lydian. So then what's going to be the interval name? Typically, it's going to be a 0 node away perfect first, a 0 node away perfect first. I'd rather call it a 0 node away from the Lydian node, zeroist modal half step, right? So we didn't go anywhere, but we're on a different continent, right? We're measuring from here instead of from here, and we didn't go anywhere from there. The distance is the same, clearly. So what if I go then, I'm looking at this one first, if I go 1 modal half step up from Lydian, that would be the 4th, going up 1 to the 5th, or that would be then a YX, or Lydian Mixolydian, or a 4-5 modal range, a 4-5 modal range. So that would mean it's a scale degree of the 2nd. If I make that the 1, that would be the 2nd. And then the note half steps, is it the same number of continents and oceans? Well, it's 2. That's the same, right? So if I go 2 notes up, continents and oceans, I land on the first modal half step, or the 2nd scale degree. So it's a different location, of course. It's Mixolydian as opposed to the Dorian, but I still land on the first continent up if I go 2 steps, or 2 continent and oceans. We call that a 2 node away major 2nd, which is the same as what we had here in the Ionian, and that's going to then be a 2 node away Lydian first modal half step, which is what I would rather call it. So what if I go 3 then up? So now I'm going to say, all right, what if I go up to the 3rd, or we go up to here, and I compare that to going a distance of 3 continents up from the Ionian. That's going to be then 2 modal half steps up. So what would we call that? We'd land on the Aeolian, so it's going to be a YA. And if we go 2 up from the 4, that's going to land us on the 6, which is the Aeolian. So it's a 4-6 modal range. The scale degree would be the 3rd if I make that the 1, 1, 2, 3, and that's going to be a notes, the distance in continents and oceans, 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that the same as the Ionian? Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4. So what's going to be the name then? We're going to call it a 4 node away major 3rd. I'd rather call it, though, a 4 node away from the Lydian, a 2nd modal half step. All right, let's go to the next one. Let's say we go down 3 modal half steps up. So now we're going to go 3 modal half steps from the Lydian, or the 4th scale degree. Is that the same as here? There looks to be a difference in the pattern. So that would give us a YN modal range, Lydian to a Locrian modal range, and that would be a 4 plus 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which would be the Locrian. That would be a 4-7 modal range. We went 3 modal half steps, or continents up, which would be the 4th scale degree. What's the distance? It's a oh, that's a crazy 6. Now, when you see a 6, you should be thinking, oh, that's a crazy distance. I don't care if I'm going backwards or forwards. 6 is strange. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What if I went up the same number of continents? 1, 2, 3, 3rd continent up, 4th scale degree. It would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So notice this one is different. And this is why the Lydian might not be as used as the Ionian or Mixolydian, because it has that interval that's quite odd. So notice my naming convention is off. It should be a 6 node away augmented 4th. I pulled this in from Excel. This is that naming problem where you have 2 names for the same interval. So I'm just going to note that because I don't want to rework my whole Excel worksheet for those 2 naming conventions. We talk about that in Excel, but just note that that's a weird one. So that's I'd rather call it a 6 node away from the Lydian 3rd modal half step, which you would think would be the 4th scale degree, not the 5th, which means you'd have to call it a augmented 4th. Now, why is this happening? This is happening in part because, remember, they had to make this 7 perfect. They didn't have to, but that's what they did, which means that the one below it couldn't be a minor. They had to come up with another name, which they came up with a diminished 5th or an augmented 4th, and it's all kind of messy there. Okay, but it is what it is. Let's do the next one. Let's say we go up then 4 modal half steps. So that's going to land me then 4 continents up is going to be there. 1, 2, 3, 4. If I go up 4 continents here, now it looks like we're back on the same pattern, same kind of distance and oceans and continents, it seems like. So what's that going to get me to? We're going to get me to a Lydian to an Ionian modal range, which means it's 4 plus 4 would be 8. 8 minus 7 would be 1. So it'd be a 4-1 modal range when we go in the clockwise direction. 4 modal half steps or continents clockwise. And that would be the 5th scale degree if I make that the 1, which means the note half steps would be 7. That would be continents and oceans. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The layout pattern of continents and oceans are not the same, but there's the same number of total continent and oceans to get there. Okay, what is going on with this? I need to make that smaller. Okay, so what do we call that? We're going to call that a 7-node away perfect 5th. I'd rather call it a 7-node away from the Lydian node 4th modal half step, which would be the 5th scale degree. All right, let's say we go up then 5. So if we go up 5 continents, then this is going to be moving up to here. And is that the same over here? We would think all the rest of them would basically be the same because we already had our 1 interval difference for the majors. That's going to land us on a Dorian. So it's a Lydian-Dorian modal range or YD modal range. It's 4 plus 5, which is 9, minus 7 gives me to 2. And so it's a 4-2 modal range from a natural number system. 5th modal half step or continents, which means it would be the 6th scale degree. And the number of half steps up is 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So what do we call a 9-node away distance? A 9-node away major 6. That's the same over here. I'd rather call it a 9-node away Lydian 5th modal half step, which would be the 6th scale degree. So same distance here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9. You can see it's 9 distance, even though the pattern between them is different. All right, let's go to the last one and say we go a distance of 6 modal half steps up. So if I go 6 modal half steps up, that's going to land us on a YP. So let's bring this up to here. We're going to say it's a YP, bring this up to here, and we're going to say this is going to be then an IN and a YP. So it's going to be then a 4, it won't let me click on this one, 4-3 modal range. Because it's 4 plus 6, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, minus 7 would be 3, going clockwise around. That would give us the 7th scale degree. What's the distance then? The distance is going to be, it won't let me click on this. There it is. The distance is 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So that was the same for the Ionian distance. So that's going to be an 11-node away major 7. I'd rather call it an 11-node away from the Lydian 6th modal half step. Okay, now let's do the same thing, but this time we're going to go to the Mixolydian. So Mixolydian, which I also have as green. How come it says that? It should say Mixolydian. Just note, we're on the Mixolydian here. Let's pull all these down. So we start off on the same spot, 0 to 0 on the Mixolydian. Let's make this one red this time. So we'll say, okay, let's make this one red. Different color for the Mixolydian. So let's say we start here on this one. And let's say we start on the Mixolydian, we don't go anywhere. And then we'll go to here after that. So let's go back to the pointer. So if we don't go anywhere on the Mixolydian, then that's going to give us an XX modal range. It's going to be starting and ending on the 5 from a modal range, Nashville number system, 0 modal half steps, 1st scale degree, and so we call that a 0-node away perfect 1st. Similar to what we had before, I'd rather call it 0-node away from the Mixolydian, which I'm labeling with an X, 0th modal half step. All right, what if we go 1 modal half step up? So if I go 1 modal half step up, then I would be going here to here. Is that similar to what we do on the Ionian? If I go to the Ionian, it would be going here to here. It's a little staggered because we're starting on a different point, but you can see the distance still lands us on a continent. It's 1 continent up either way, so it should be the same. So we're going to call that then Mixolydian. It would be then Mixolydian lands on the Aeolian. It's going to be a 5 to a 6 because it's 5 plus 1, 5, 6 modal range. That would be then the second scale degree. How many notes away is it? It's 2 notes away. What do we call a 2 note away distance? Well, it's still a 2 note away major second. The major is not really helping us much. I could just call it a 2 note away second, would be better, or even better than that. 2 note away from the Mixolydian mode, first modal half step. Okay, what if I go 2 modal half steps up, 2 continents up, which would be the third scale degree. Comparing them out, if I go 2 up, I would be here. If I go from the Lydian, I would be here from the Mixolydian, and I would be here. So those distances look 1, 2, 3 up, right? They look like would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Same distances. So that should be the same. So we're going to say, all right, that's going to land you on Mixolydian to the Locrian, an XN modal range. It's going to be a 5, 7 modal range. Why? Because 5 plus 2 is 7. And then 2 continent or modal half steps up, which would be the third scale degree, which would be 4 notes up, continents and oceans, same as with the Ionian and the Lydian, the other 2 major modes. We call that a 4 note away major third or a 4 note away third. That's the interval that's most important. That's the one that defines whether it's major or minor. I'd rather call it a 4 note away from the Mixolydian mode, second modal half step. What if we go then 3 nodes up? So 3 nodes up. So if I did that from the Mixolydian, it's going to land me here. If I did it from the Lydian, it lands me here. And if I did it from the Locrian, it's going to land me here. All right, so what's going to be the distance then? That's going to be then, we're going to call that an XI modal range. It's going to be a 5, 1 modal range. Why? Because it's 5 plus 3, which is 8, minus 7, gives us the 1. That's going to be a scale degree of 4. Modal half steps are going to be 5. That is different from the Lydian, but the same as the Mixolydian, because this is where the Lydian is funny. Mixolydian is in conformity with the Ionian here. In other words, if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 matches the Ionian, but not the Lydian. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the Lydian is the odd one out for the major scales. It's the weird one. It's the odd one out for the minor scales on that particular interval as well. It's odd. So we call it a 5 note away perfect fourth. So I'd rather call it a 5 note away from the Mixolydian third modal half step. Again, that's different on the Lydian, but same pattern for the Ionian. All right, what if we go 4 modal half steps up? What would be the pattern there? So if I take this from the Lydian, it would be to the Ionian. If I go from the Mixolydian, we're going up to here. And if I go from this Ionian, it would be going up to here. So that would be then a modal range of an XD modal range. We would land, in other words, on the Dorian. It would be a modal range of a 5, 2 modal range, because 5 plus 4 would be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, minus 7 would be 2. That would be 4 modal half steps up, which would be 5 scale degree, 5th scale degree. Distance is going to be 7 notes. Now that sounds familiar. Is that the same with all of them? I believe it is, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that 7 note distance is what should be the thing that indicates that it's stable, not the perfect, right? So it's a 7 note away 5th or 7 note away perfect 5th. I'd rather call it a 7 note away from the Mixolydian 4th modal half step. Same pattern for the Lydian and the Ionian. What if we then go out 5 modal half steps? So we go 5 modal half steps out. So now we're going to say, okay, that would bring me out here for the Lydian. That would bring me out here to the Phrygian from the Mixolydian, and from the Ionian, it would bring me to the Aeolian. Okay, so what's the range then? It would be it would get me from Mixolydian to the Phrygian, XP modal range. It would get me from the 5. 5 plus 5 would be 10. 10 minus 7 would be 3. It's a 5, 3 modal range. scale degrees would be 6 then. Distance is going to be 9. So a 9-note distance, is that the same for all of them? It would be a 9-note distance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So all the major modes have a 9-note away distance, and so that's going to be what we call a major 9. I'd rather call it a 9-note away sixth. And I'm sorry, major 9, a major 6. So it would be a 9-note away from the Mixolydian node's 5th modal half step. So what I'd rather call it. Okay, so lastly, if we go up 6 here, if we go up 6, that would land me out here, doon, and that would land me out here. And you got to be saying, hey, look, I thought Mixolydian's exactly the same as the Ionian, isn't it? It's exactly the same. But no, because this is going to land you now on an XY modal range, getting you from Mixolydian to Lydian, which would be 5 plus 6, 11 minus 7, which would get you a 5, 4 modal range. And that scale degree would be 7 then. And then the pointer is dying. It won't do it. 10-note away distance. 10-note away distance, that's different. So a 10-note away distance is different. Let's count that out. Because from here it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So this is where the Mixolydian is different. It's similar to the minors, which has a 10-note distance. But again, the little m shouldn't be telling you the 10. It's a 10-note away 7th. That's more like the minor. That's why Mixolydian is bluesy. So then we have, I'd rather call it a 10-note away from the Mixolydian 6th modal half step. All right, so that's the general idea. Now notice in Excel, we have this table, and you can kind of hide columns to get everything side by side. Obviously, we can't do that as much in like a PDF or in OneNote. So I highly recommend getting used to Excel, but I'll show you just a couple ways that you might populate the table so you can see these things side by side and possibly give a resource to put them side by side. So let's see if I can move this down. And so, for example, you might have a table like this, where I have Ionian, Lydian, Mixolydian, the 3 major modes, and I might just want to compare the scale degree intervals, meaning you have a perfect first, perfect first, perfect first for scale degree 1, first modal half step. Second scale degree is also a 2-note away major second across the board. Third scale degree has a 4-note away major third across the board. That's the big one, which you would completely expect. But the fourth scale degree or third modal half step has funniness happening on the Lydian. That's where the Lydian is different than the Ionian. Each of them have one interval different. It should be, by the way, not a diminished fifth, but an augmented fourth. The distance is the same, but we have 2 names for it. You can see the 4 over here, so it should be an augmented fourth. We discussed that before. But if you go to the 5th scale degree, which would be the 4th modal distance, that's the same across the board, 7-note away perfect 5th. If you go a distance of 6, it's going to be all the same, 9-note away major 6. And then if you do the 7th, that's where the Mixolydian is different. It has the minor interval or 10-note away distance instead of 11. If you go to the 7th scale degree, which is, in other words, is 6 steps up from the continent to continent. What if you compare it this way? Another way you might want to see it with the new naming convention. So now we're looking more at the modal distance. If I stay in the same spot, then of course I'm still on the Ionian, Lydian, and Mixolydian. I didn't go anywhere. If I go 1 modal half step up, then it's the same distance to get to that next continent. So the 1 represents the continent up that we're going, and the 2 represents the continents and oceans. What if I go 2 continents up? Well, then it's still going to take me the same distance of continents and oceans. The 4 represents the continents and oceans. The 2 represents the 2 continents. What if I want to go 3 continents up? Then the 3, we have the difference here for the Lydian once again, because it takes a continent and ocean distance of 6 from the Lydian to get 3 continents up. Whereas for the other 2, Ionian and Mixolydian, you would go 5 continent and oceans up to get to the 3rd continent up, right? And by the way, notice that this naming convention also means that you can drop either side. Notice over here, people usually drop the notes and they call this like a perfect fourth, but you don't know where it's going from or where it's measuring from. Over here, you could call this you could drop any one term, right? You could call this a 5-note away from the Ionian, and people would know what you're talking about. You could call it an Ionian third modal half step, and people could derive that it's 5 notes away. You could call it a 5-note away third modal half step. Drop the Ionian and use it just like you do over here, which means you'd have to define the point that you're starting from, right? So notice this naming convention is way more versatile than this one. It tells you where you're at on the board, it tells you the notes, and it tells you the distance in a proper naming convention. And if you want to make it more simplified, you can drop any one of the terms and still have enough information to name what you want to do. If you go 5 out, it would be a 7-note away from the Ionian fourth modal half step. So to get 4 continents up, it would be 7 continents and oceans from each point in the clockwise direction. If you want to go to the 5th continent up, it's going to be a distance of 9 continents and oceans for each of them. And if you want to go 6 continents up, then it's going to be 11 normally, but that's where the Mixolydian is different, where it's only where you have 10. And then you might compare each of them, right? There's another table. You might want both of those side by side. So now you can see the scale degrees and the 2 different measuring constructions side by side this way. So just note that if you're able to navigate in Excel, then you can hide any columns you want and make any comparisons, because you might want any other comparison. You might want to add the modal ranges to some of them just in the number format, or possibly just in the letter format. You might want to see these columns or not see these columns. These columns are kind of redundant if you see them over here, but in Excel you can see the formula and see how these are derived, which again is useful, because then it'll see how you should be putting things together. If you see how the table's put together, then that is actually how your mind should visualize it, right? So anyways, that's that one.